Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thanks for coming. A little background on Valerie Van Heest. She's primarily a historian and is best probably known as a diver and underwater explorer who has been involved in the discovery and historical research of numerous Great Lakes shipwrecks. She has written no fewer than 7 award-winning books on her activities as a shipwreck explorer, and she has appeared in many lecture halls as well as on television episodes presented by National Geographic, Science, Travel, and the History Channel. She's co-founder of the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association and was inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame. Beyond historian, underwater explorer, author, and lecturer, Valerie is also a business owner of Lafferty Van Heest and Associates, which curates and designs museum exhibits. Since 2012, she's provided these services to the Historical Beach Society that operates Holland's Pump House Museum, as well as the Ottawa County Parks and Recreation Department. But now, in addition to Great Lakes shipwrecks, Valerie has a keen interest in many other histories. Among them, the story of one of the most prominent and influential buildings ever constructed in Holland, which was the Ottawa Beach Hotel that served thousands of tourists between 1880 and 1920. That's what she will be talking to us about today. Valerie holds a combined bachelor's degree from Loyola University and the Harrington Institute of Design in Chicago. Married to Jack Van Heest, she lives in Holland and has 2 children in college. One's a Spartan and the other one is a Wolverine. With that, I'll turn the camera over to Valerie Van Heest.
All right. Well, hello. I'm going to share my screen and say that I see a few familiar faces. I can't see everyone. I understand there's about 85 people here. I do see Anne and Peg on my screen. Hi, Anne. Thank you, Anne, for proofing all my work over the years. My goodness, I sure need you. Here is the screen with the photograph of the famous Ottawa Beach Hotel. Now, this is going to be a little tough for me because when I present, it's normally so fun to engage with the audience, to see your reactions, to respond to questions while the program is going on. But Zoom doesn't allow that. So we'll save that for the next time we all get together in person. So I'm going to rattle. I can sure talk up a storm. Sorry if I'm going to proceed too quickly, but we'll keep it moving. We've got about an hour and a half. And sure, at the end, we can take your chat questions, or if you end up turning on your microphones and we talk, we can do that as well. So as Tom said, I'm really involved in 3 entities. Many of you know me from my shipwreck work, not as many from my museum work. And then of course, I've written a number of books. Many of you have read them. You see them across the screen here. My latest is about the Lakewood Farm and Zoo, George Getz's famous attraction in Holland, and maybe I'll be back at some point to talk about that. I also have a little connection with Hope College, co-writing and editing a publication that heralded the science program there after 100 years. So that's what I've been up to. Today I'm speaking to you in my role as an exhibit designer. I've done quite a bit of work at Ottawa Beach. I started out working for the Homeowners Association there, and then Ottawa County developing interpretive signage. I began working with the Historic Ottawa Beach Society, whose mission was to restore the old pump house, and we'll get to why that's called a pump house a little bit later. You can see that over the years that's been converted. I hope many of you have been down there along the boardwalk. I also, because I'm a designer, I designed the toilets. How about that for an exciting interior design project? But they're pretty good looking toilets, if I do say so. I also developed this kiosk that's down along the walk front. This details the history of the hotel. And I hope I can cover the information that's on there as well as some other information in today's program. At the museum, we have a small exhibit dedicated to the hotel, and you see hanging up at the top a wicker chair that once was in the hotel that has been donated to the museum. So lots of interesting artifacts there. Over the years, I've developed a number of exhibits. The Big Red exhibit was up for 2 years. It's been sized down to a touchscreen exhibit. It's still there if you want to take a look. And what's running right now is Holland's Earliest Amusements, an exhibit about the Lakewood Farm and Zoo and Jenison Electric Park. And folks, that is a lion inside the museum. So come and see that lion. Recently, I completed the Park Township Plaza for Park Township and Ottawa Beach, and we'll talk about that. That's on former hotel property. And now I want to get into the early years, what led up to the development of the Ottawa Beach Hotel. And as we all know, any lecture about Holland's early years has to begin with this fella, Albertus Van Raalte. I won't belabor the point. I'm sure all you knowledgeable Holland historians know how he left the Netherlands in the mid 1840s, came over on a steamship, was headed for Wisconsin, ended up being shown a parcel of land in what we now call Holland, and developed a Dutch community there. What was so important to Van Raalte as he was looking at a variety of properties in Michigan was the connection to Lake Michigan. And this early survey drawing shows that it's not where it is today. It was a circuitous path that was very shallow north of where the channel is today. Very important to him was digging out that channel, and we all know the story about how the government wouldn't assist and the resourceful Hollanders dug their own channel. It's really a very complicated story, but eventually that channel was dug at the narrowest portion of the land. And by 1870, this illustration represents 1870 before the big fire, steamships and sailing vessels were regularly coming into the port of Holland. And that set the groundwork for what would be the Ottawa Beach Hotel eventually. Now, as Holland was developing itself into a maritime port, this was a period of technological revolution, kind of called the second industrial revolution, where machinery was minimizing the laborious work in factories, and workers were actually having shorter work days, higher salaries, and with that, more free time. So the technological revolution, the second one, really created a new industry, and that was the leisure industry. Now in Holland, of course, we all know the beautiful cool breezes down by the lake. A lot of people began camping in Holland. This is actually a photograph from the late 1870s, maybe early 1880s. It's from Lois Jessic Kay's collection, and it shows campers on the south side of the channel in what is today the Makatawa Parks Association. So what a wonderful historic image. Camping, of course, is not the way everybody wanted to vacation. The resourceful Hollanders saw a potential for an industry, and the first resort parks cropped up. Now we've got to take a look at this railroad map from that era, the early 1880s, to understand that here's Holland. We had a depot, we had railroads feeding from Grand Rapids up to Grand Haven, down to South Haven. They all fed into Holland. But you can see, if you see my cursor here, that there's really no path out to the lakeshore where the camping was and where resorts began to be developed. If we take a closer look at that map, you can see the area where the railroads converged, and again, no real means of transportation out to the lakeshore. Well, originally, the first hotel developed was the Park House Hotel. This is what eventually grew into the Macatawa Hotel. That was on the south side out by the lake shore between Lake Michigan and Lake Macatawa. But the road out there looked something like this. This is another image from Lois Jessica Kay's collection. So you can imagine it was pretty tough getting out there. Horse and buggy, horses, that was about the only way to travel. Now, an interesting group from the Grand Rapids area, businessmen and their families associated with the Chicago and West Michigan Railroad, also wanted to develop a cottage and resort park. They sought land on the south side near the Park House Hotel, but they couldn't get any there. So they settled on a portion of land on the north side, and they platted a neighborhood called the West Michigan Park Association. And you can see all the cottage lots platted here. One of the key development ideas that they had was to set aside a number of parcels. So all the parcels you see in green here marked, you see one marked Sand Park, Mount Pisgah Park, Grove Park, Allegan Park. These were all plots of land where they agreed not to build cottages. They would leave that as green space. You know, we do that all the time now, developers do. But this was a really innovative idea back then. And they also wanted to share their neighborhood with members of the public. It would still be a private resort park, but the Chicago and West Michigan Railroad, with the help of their investors, decided to develop a hotel. And you see the hotel marked in yellow here, and you see it enlarged and then platted in one of the parks. They called it Ottawa Park, one of the empty parcels. And on that parcel, they built the Hotel Ottawa, named, as you can well imagine, for the Native Americans, the Ottawas, who were here at the time that Van Raalte moved into the area. So this was the hotel. It's a very famous image. It's in the collection of the Grand Rapids Public Library, built on a plan that was a Maltese cross plan. The majority of the rooms were on the second floor, and the third floor had an open deck. Most people don't realize from this photograph that there was a complete wing in the back. Let me move my cursor there. This is a complete wing. You'll later see some images of that. But a very stylish yet rather primitive hotel, not terribly upscale. Getting there was a little bit of a difficulty. Now, this is an extraordinary image that I found in the collection of the Joint Archives. Thank you, Jeff Reynolds. It took me just a little bit to figure out where the photographer was when he took this picture. Now, put yourself in the place of the photographer, and there's the bridge heading into, let me move my cursor there, into Holland, virtually the same bridge we have today. So can you picture, this is where CVS Pharmacy stands today? And over to the right is where the Shell gas station is. And the buggy has just passed the D&W store on its left. Can you imagine that? So what a tough time it was to travel 7 miles out to the Ottawa Beach Hotel. Well, in short order, both big hotels, the Park House Hotel on the south side and the Hotel Ottawa on the north side, put into play 2 steamships. This is the Queen of the Lakes, which predominantly ran for the Park House Hotel, and this is the Ottawa that appropriately ran to the Hotel Ottawa. And there was a bit of a steamship war going on in those early years, because if you got on the wrong boat, it would take you to the other hotel where perhaps you would check into that facility instead of where you had planned. It wasn't like the days today with fixed reservations. Well, things were so busy with the railroad bringing people into Chicago and the small boats taking people out to the Hotel Ottawa that by 1892, this was 6 years after the hotel originally went up, the hotel decided to build an annex. And here is the annex, a drawing of that annex. And they also decided to run a leg of their train line out to Ottawa Beach. Now, look at how massive that train is. We can all picture where it is. This is the original 1870 built lighthouse, still there in the 1890s. And it's the view we see today. There's the channel. But here was this train service that went out there, an extraordinary image. And this was the annex with the original hotel. The original hotel is about 500 feet from the shores of Lake Mac. There was some support, well, I should say not Lake Mac, I should say Black Lake, because that's what it was called back in the day. There were some support facilities, and there's the annex. And you know, what's interesting about this is looking at that old hotel and annex, I see on the right what we would consider today sort of a small boutique hotel. And I see on the left, I see the Red Roof Inn. Do any of you see the Red Roof Inn? That annex was a very simple structure, laid out just the way our Red Roof Inns or, you know, economy motels are today. A corridor that ran down the center and rooms on either side. Of course, there were no elevators, so people had to walk stairs to get to the second floor. Now, here's that view I talked about of the original hotel, and you can see there was quite the support facility for that behind there. There was a kitchen, there was a dining hall, and there were public restrooms. So in the middle of the night, if you needed to use the facilities, you went downstairs into the attached area and did your business there. And this photograph shows us just the very littlest hint on the far right of the annex. So you can see that was a little distance walk, about 150 feet away. This is a view seen from one of the cottages. And interestingly, they had a cannon on their front lawn. Wonder where that is today. Now, an extraordinary resource that we all have at our fingertips are the Sanborn Maps. These are stored at both the Holland Museum and the Joint Archives. And so we go into those Sanborn Maps, and this one dates to, oh, I'm hiding the date over here. I can't see it behind my picture, but this should be the 1890s, I think. Tom, can you read that date? It's an early, the date
I can read the first line.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's suffice it to say it's after 1896. And so we see the plan of the hotel here, we see the relationship to the annex, and then we see a bridge over the railroad tracks connecting it to some of the waterfront facilities that the hotel ran. There's a close-up of the plan. What was interesting about this is we noticed that it mentioned a steam pump being located 200 feet north of the hotel, and that contained a water supply. Now, when we saw this, I was pretty sure we were on to solving a mystery that had lingered among the Ottawa Beach cottage owners for decades. what we learned from newspaper accounts that the hotel had running water, and we understood that a windmill supplied running water originally. That windmill in this photograph can be seen just behind the hotel. The windmill would have been used to use the power of the wind to operate a pump to extract spring water from the ground, but we understood that it was not quite efficient enough to supply the hotel. And so we can imagine that they added this steam pump that they referenced that was located 200 feet north of the hotel. Well, if we rotate the plan so that the hotel, so that the top of this drawing is facing north, and then we plot that distance, we plot where the hotel is in relationship to the cottages that stand there on an aerial map today, and we measure 200 feet north, we come upon the garage of an existing home. And here's what that garage looks like today. And for any of you who've been out and walked the neighborhood, this house belongs to Rick Van Til and his wife. And for as long as they've owned it, this structure they knew had something to do with the hotel. For any of you that have the Van Rieken book about Ottawa Beach, it was called a water tower, but nobody really understood how it operated until we really dug into the utilities at Ottawa Beach. This is the one and only photograph that exists of that water tower. It was taken after the Lakeland Hotel that you see pictured here was burned. So this is a photograph during firefighting work, and there's this structure. But now we've solved the mystery of what that structure was. It was a new and improved water pumping facility based on the very early Newcomb principles of a steam-powered pumping station. And you can well imagine how a rocker arm moved through that opening in Rick Van Til's historic structure. And that is how groundwater came up and was held in a tank and was supplying the hotel with water. So we solved a mystery. Now we also solved kind of another mystery or conundrum. When a local family donated to the Pump House Museum, they donated this amazing guest register from the Hotel Ottawa. The register detailed the patrons from 1893 to 1895. Just fascinating. I've combed through every page. I've looked at every name. I've looked at every city that they came from. We were really able to understand during that 3-year period where the guests hailed from. The majority of them came from Michigan. But there were quite a number of other patrons coming from many other states throughout the country. And can you see lower right corner, Canada and England? We also saw patrons coming here. So this was a very, very much wonderful destination that drew people. Now, one of the interesting register names that we found, and in fact, Van Rieken, when he wrote his book, he had access to this register, and he talked about the visit to the Hotel Ottawa by John Jacob Astor. Now, many of you know the history of John Jacob Astor IV. His claim to fame, he descended from, the Astor family, but in 1894, the same year that his name is listed in this register, he had just erected the Astoria Hotel in New York. So Van Rieken talked about how wonderful it was about his visit to Holland to see our humble little hotel, Ottawa. When we got that register, we wanted to look further into Astor's visit, and we presumed that if such a significant man had visited Holland, that the local papers would make some mention of his visit. We couldn't find any mention of his visit at all. And we started to question the authenticity of that signature when we looked through other areas in the register, and we saw these interesting registrations by, I can't even read their names here, but when they listed where they're from, this person said he was from somewhere. This person listed that he was from anywhere. This person listed he was from nowhere. And this person listed that he was from anywhere. So what we came to realize is people were jokesters back then, just like they're jokesters today. And we were pretty sure that this John Jacob Astor was just a jokester. And we became even more convinced of that when we got a hold of the real John Jacob Astor's signature. He always signed his name J.J. Astor. So what we learned is that people were no different back then than we are today. You like to have fun, and boy, did he have fun with us for a long time, that imposter. So how neat. Well, towards the end of the 19th century, this is really the golden age of the hotels. This is also the golden age of steamships. In Holland, by then, we had not only the Hotel Ottawa, the Park Hotel, which eventually became the Macatawa. We had the Grand Hotel, a number of small hotels on the south side. By the early 1900s, we had the Wakazoo Inn on the north side. This is the Lakeland Hotel that burned. But you can see that Holland had become a thriving destination. There's the Macatawa Hotel. This is the original Park House Hotel, which became the dining hall for the much larger Macatawa Hotel. And there you can see what it looked like when it was originally built. Of course, our channel, developed by Van Raalte and the early Dutch, was really the key to these hotels thriving, because not only were people coming from Grand Rapids by train and then, by these small boats and the railroad out to the hotels, but they were also coming via steamships. This is an exquisitely detailed photograph from the Horner collection, a private collection that recently came into the Holland area. And you can see one of the Graham and Morton steamers. You can see the name G&M backwards. It's exiting the channel here. And here's the old catwalk to the hotel. But these steamers were coming into to Holland on a regular basis. Almost every night there was a boat coming in from Chicago. The time to get from Chicago to Holland was virtually the same amount of time that we would get today on a big boat. It was about a 12-hour overnight cruise. So a lot of these vessels had overnight accommodations, dancing, drinking, enjoying the evening before turning in to one of the cabins for a little rest before arriving in Holland in the morning to depart. This is showing a dock on the south side of the lake, or of course, they could dock at the north side of the lake. Now in 1896, the owners of the hotel decided to make another change. What they were finding is the views from the hotel up the dune, where it used to stand next to the annex, were not as good as they could have been, and a lot of blown sand made it hard to keep the walkways clear. So they decided to simply move the hotel. Pretty easy undertaking, wouldn't you imagine, in 1896? I had read a number of accounts of the moving of the hotel. I longed to find a photograph. That would not be, but I did find a newspaper account that talked about how that hotel was moved. And interestingly, apparently it was jacked up. Logs were, a series of logs were loaded under it, and it was actually rolled down to the lakeshore. And then by comparing the original hotel to the configuration we see at the lakeshore, we can understand that what they did is they built a concrete base, and then they lifted this hotel onto that base. I really don't know how they lifted it. I did find the account of how they rolled it there. I really can't fathom how they lifted it back in the day. Maybe a series of jacks. After all, when we consider the city of Chicago was lifted up to install sewers, we know that this sort of thing was possible. But at the same time, we also see that the roof line changed considerably. And what we think they were doing at that point is they were really fashioning this hotel out of what was going on in Europe at the time. So this took on a much more European flair, and certainly a much more sophisticated flair, which was maybe what they were envisioning would satisfy the demands of, particularly the Chicago elite who were traveling here. Now, at the turn of the century, the hotel really came into its own. By then, the Chicago and West Michigan Railroad, small railroad, merged with the Flint and Pere Marquette Railroad that operated much larger railroad network. And the Flint and Pere Marquette actually merged into what we came to know as simply the Pere Marquette Railroad. 3 different railroad lines merged together. And because the Chicago and West Michigan Railroad owned the original Hotel Ottawa, that fell into ownership by the Pere Marquette Hotel. And in 1901, the Pere Marquette Railroad decided to expand that hotel. And you can see the moved hotel here, the original annex there, and you can see the large addition. If we look at another postcard, this is a panoramic postcard, you see the magnitude of this addition, probably 4 times the size of that original little boutique hotel. So we were, at this point, the hotel was able to accommodate almost 1,000 paying guests per night with this extraordinary, very European flavored hotel. Now, I became particularly interested in accounts of the light plant because, remember, I have been doing work for the Historic Ottawa Beach Society, which was renovating the old pump house. Now, at that point, we really didn't understand this structure, but as we dug into the newspaper accounts, we realized that in 1901, what we now call the pump house was what the Pere Marquette Railroad built as an electric light plant. We see that electric light plant right over here to the right, and we can see that it's labeled the electric light plant. This is a 1902 Sanborn map, so this was drawn up. Now, I'm sure all of you understand the Sanborn maps, but in case anybody doesn't, these were fire insurance maps drawn up by the Sanborn Company so that they could understand the different properties they were insuring. And of course, the hotel was insured for fire. So, so we see the hotel in its position here. We see a detail of that hotel here, and we see the electric light plant. And when we zoom in, we see that that plant was divided into 2 sections. There was a a boiler in one section, and there were dynamos in the other section. There are no historic photos of the inside of this, but we did find a document in the records of the Pere Marquette Railroad that indicates that the lighting plant was constructed in 1901 for a price tag of a little over $8,000. Now, at that same time, the addition to the hotel we can see was almost $50,000. So the light plant was a significant investment for the hotel. And there is that light plant shortly after it was built, a tall smokestack to vent out the boiler. And we can see the pump house today from a similar vantage point. I just wanted you to get your bearings here. We found a photograph in the Joint Archives collection of a Dynamo electric plant on the south side of Holland. So we can imagine that this might have been the kind of equipment that was installed in the north side of the electric light plant at Ottawa Beach. Oops, same slide there. What we also learned from the Sanborn maps is that there was a reservoir up the hill on top of Mount Pisgah that supplied gravity-fed water. So now we're starting to put two and two together. We realize that water pumping facility that's now on the Van Til property, we realized that was pumping water up here. The Van Til pump house is actually hidden in the Sanborn map, but we can see the line that connected it up to the top of Mount Pisgah where the water tank was, and then this line that came down and fed the hotel. And we also noticed an interesting notation here about a Deming water pump. And this was also pumping groundwater up to that large reservoir. There's a lot of springs out there. So this was particularly interesting to us. I'll tell you why later. But here's the Hotel Ottawa in the early 1900s in its glory period. You've all seen numerous gorgeous postcards of the hotel during that era. And boy, it's kind of sad. There are only two photographs of the interior, the lobby area and the dining room. So that is our only our only vision into what this hotel might have been like. Interestingly, these wicker chairs are in the lobby photograph, and at the pump house, you'll see one of those wicker chairs that's been saved all these years. So extraordinary to see history come alive. So here is a tourist map of Hoppin, Ottawa Beach, and all the other attractions. We see Holland in the distance. We see the Jenison Electric Park. That's not part of our talk today, but if you want to learn more about that, head down to the Pump House Museum to see the exhibit there. But what an interesting image of the lakefront attractions in the early 1900s. Now, let's get into the first third of the 20th century, and we'll talk about traffic and technology, because this is really a period of enormous change technologically. By that point, we had over 10 steamers that were regularly calling on Holland, delivering passengers to all the different hotels. The famous Puritan is one of the boats that people most remember, and these are various shots of the Puritan. We also had a lot of attractions at Ottawa Beach. A fellow named Bill Murphy, whose house, small little house, was located right here. He ran a boat rental facility. We can still relate to that. Boats are still rented down at Ottawa Beach today. Can you all imagine all you ladies and gents in your long dresses and three-piece suits getting in a boat to, enjoy the cool breezes on Black Lake. I think we dress a little bit differently today when we go boating, but always fun to put ourselves back in the era. And then enjoying the veranda that surrounded the Hotel Ottawa. And, you know, if you go down there today and you look across, you still see some of these structures across the way. So this was a great view from the porch, the south porch of the hotel. And another marketing graphic, as you can well imagine, these were in brochures, these were on postcards, you know, really showcasing all that Holland had to offer in the early 1900s. But then, of course, the automobile came into being. When the first Model T rolled off Henry Ford's conveyor belt, people took to the roads more than they took to the lake. And Ottawa Beach really had a struggle, as well as the Macatawa Park area and the resorts there. They had a struggle to accommodate these cars. There was no parking, there was really no road, and in short order, the Pierre Marquette Railroad realized that this spur line that they had running out to Ottawa Beach was no longer going to be patronized, and so they concrete covered the railroad tracks, discontinued service, and now this photograph shows probably the early 1910s, the cars heading out to Ottawa Beach, but where are they going to park? Well, the hotel, this is a great, very rare view of the north side of the hotel. We usually see the photographs from the Black Lake side, but they built steel garages to accommodate some of the automobiles that were coming out there, but of course parking was still a nightmare. You see the annex back here. I should also mention, I don't know if my Sanborn maps show it, but let me go back. The annex in 1916, I believe it was, when around the time that this garage was built, the annex was actually lifted and rotated. The trees had been growing, the views because of the foliage had been changing. And so the Pierre Marquette that operated the hotel decided that if they picked the annex up and rotated it, they would be able to capture on one side views of Black Lake and on the other side views of Lake Michigan. So in another extraordinary engineering feat that was jacked up and rotated. So interesting little factoid. This article is from 1915, and it talks about the Muskegon Power Company bringing light to the cottages at Macatawa Park and Ottawa Beach and the Ottawa Beach Hotel. It took a little digging to understand what was going on here, but we came to understand that essentially the Muskegon Power Company was bringing public utilities out to the hotel. They set up shop inside the hotel's electric light plant, and they were able to then sell electric light to the various cottages. As we came to understand, the hotel was generating its own electric for the outdoor lighting and what came to be indoor lighting at the hotel. So they kept operating their dynamos, but this 1916 Sanborn map shows that the Deming water pump that used to pull groundwater and send it up to the water tower on top of Mount Pisgah is no longer there. And we came to understand that in fact, that Deming water pump was moved into the electric light plant. So so what we now understand is that the function of delivering water to the hotel, which was largely used for potential fire suppression and drinking water in the hotel, now began to be pumped from springs near Black Lake that surrounded this electric light plant. And so in 1915, when that Deming pump was moved into the electric light plant, locals began calling this the pump house. So that is the origin of that name, why we call it the pump house today. Now, I wish photographs existed from back in the day. This is actually a photograph from the early 2000s, but it gives us a little view of what that pump house looked like. There was an opening here. You can imagine all the critters that had gotten into this building, but the pipes from the springs fed the Deming pump, which then stored the water in this water tank for supplying the hotel and the local cottages. We see, in fact, that has been confirmed by the nomenclature that indicates that the Deming pump had now been moved into that pump house. And we also saw for the first time some detail about that reservoir that existed on top of Mount Pisgah, a 125-gallon reservoir. Now, one of the oldest members, I should say property owners at Ottawa Beach, Fred Voss, Fred Voss lives in this cottage today. As a child, he remembers climbing up Mount Pisgah long before there were stairs. And he remembers seeing that reservoir up there, a large round water tower that stood on legs. That is our holy grail of photographs. We have never been able to find a photograph of that water tank. I don't know that we ever will. If any of you have a photograph, make sure you let us know. But we really started to understand, more about the utilities. And then there's the nomenclature that indicates it became the pump house. Now, what was so extraordinary about the period of time between when the hotel was built and the early, 1910s, 20s, 30s, is the change in utilities in just the short 40-year existence of the hotel. The utilities, the water and later electric, were generated by wind, water, steam, and gasoline power. Gasoline is what operated the Deming pump. So what an extraordinary vision that hotel gave us when you consider that wind powered all kinds of technology for centuries before this. It's really extraordinary that wind powered the early utilities at the hotel. Of course, we've all seen this extraordinary panoramic view of the hotel taken from on top of what would have been Angel's Flight on the south side of the channel. What an extraordinary view of that hotel. Now, in 1923, the hotel was getting old. It had been 23 years since the expansion, and a whole new group of owners took over the hotel. Fred Pantlin, who had run the hotel for a number of years, of course, you'll recognize that name. He also ran the Pantlin Hotel in Grand Rapids. He was one of the owners, but this local man also became one of the owners. I hope many of you recognize George Getz. I hope you'll recognize the water tower behind George Getz. That is the water tower that still stands at the near the end of Lakewood Boulevard today. So we know that George Getz is standing on his property that he named Lakewood Farm and Zoo. And there's a newly uncovered image. It happens to be the cover image from the book I wrote about Lakewood Farm and Zoo. But George's connection to the Ottawa Beach Hotel, and I didn't mention, I should say that in 1901, when the hotel was expanded, that's when the name moved from Hotel Ottawa to Ottawa Beach Hotel. But few people knew that George Getz became a 1/12 owner, along with 11 other businessmen, of the Ottawa Beach Hotel. For a number of years, he had had his own private boathouse located on Black Lake. These photographs don't quite show it, but this, his boathouse, George's boathouse, was where the current Coast Guard station stands. And this is George's yacht. And what George did in 1923, I say George because I have come to know his family. I know his grandson, Bert, quite well. So George feels like my friend after all these years. But George did an extraordinary thing. He donated his boathouse to what he formed as the Ottawa Beach Yacht Club. We can't quite see it, but just behind the yacht club is where the pump house stood. And in 1923, he and the other 11 owners planned a big regalia. Almost 10,000 people came to Holland the summer of, about Labor Day in 1923. They were upgrading this, what became the Yacht Club. They were expanding that, adding new appointments so that it could become a public clubhouse rather than just a private boathouse. And they also began about a $500,000 investment into remodeling the hotel. They began some of the work during the summer of 1923, but they saved most of the work until after the hotel closed after Labor Day, when they began a number of projects to upgrade that hotel. And it's not going to come to a surprise to any of you when I say that that is when the fire happened. We all know about the big fire that occurred in November 1923 at Ottawa Beach. Boy, do I wish there were photographs of that fire. There were not, but there were photographs of the aftermath of that fire. We know from accounts the crew was busy working, doing improvements to the hotel. It was just 2 or 3 days after they had shut down the pump house. So the fire suppression system that rung the hotel through pipes that surrounded the hotel had just been shut down. So there was no controlling that fire. Local fire department did make it down there within about 20 minutes. Newspaper accounts talked about the blaze being able to be seen from obviously across the lake, from the locals in Holland. Most of the cottagers had gone home for the winter season, and so fire just spread. This is actually the foundation of the annex that you're seeing here, and this is one of the chimneys from the hotel. This would have been the concrete roadway that ran between the annex and the hotel. One other view of that fire shows that same chimney tower, and this would have been the foundation of the hotel. And isn't it great that one of the cottages, a cottage that stood alone here, survived that fire, when you can see how close that fire came. And that cottage is still there today, the yellow cottage with the giant stairway, the last residential structure before you can get out to the beach today. So take a look at that house the next time you drive out to the beach and picture the blazing fire around it. Now, after the fire, what happened? Well, there's the beautiful hotel, And there's what it looked like after the fire. This is a postcard that I saw on eBay about 10 years ago. What's great about this is we see the yellow house there, and we see the pads for what were the tennis courts. The hotel was just next to the tennis courts. I wanted to buy this postcard, but when bidding got up around $100, I stopped bidding. But fortunately, I grabbed a digital copy off eBay, so I have been able to at least memorialize a low-res version of that postcard. But look at the devastation out there. It would have looked like this for several years. These were other structures that survived the fire. I want to point out this cottage. This is the former Pantlin Cottage. When Pantlin was managing the hotel, he lived in that cottage. The wineries later bought that cottage. Maybe some of you will recognize the name. I'm not certain. I don't remember the name of the people that own it today. Maybe it's still in the winery family. That survived the fire, and that structure actually stood, we know this from the Sanborn Maps, it stood at the original site of the first position of the hotel. These other structures existed. This was the post office for Ottawa Beach for a number of years. This was the casino. That doesn't mean there was gambling out there. It was simply a facility where you could get food and souvenirs. And this was a covered picnic area. After you got your food, you could eat in this area. And this was Bill Murphy's home. He ran these support facilities and also ran the boat rental. And for a number of years after the fire, Bill Murphy's lunchroom still operated. So this is a view from the other side. So just picture these reversed. And well into the 1970s up to 1980, those structures still existed. And you can see it was being used as a boat storage facility, but you can see how poorly kept those buildings were. At that point, they were approaching 80 years old and really hadn't been maintained very well. Now, another structure out there, oops, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Sorry, let me X out of here for a sec. Oh boy. I will go back to my sharing the screen. Sorry, we had a little technical difficulty there. I want to point out this. I want to point out this structure. Obviously, all of you who've headed down to the beach have seen this blue home. It's currently owned by Elaine Blau, who operated the Parkside Marina. This home was built on the footprint of Bill Murphy's little cottage. He was the man who operated these facilities. And so his home, I don't remember the year, but when his home burned, very quickly, a new home was built on top of it. And over the years, that home was renovated and expanded. And this is what it looks like today. So for any of you kind of wondering how there is this independent residence along all this public lakefront, it is because it was grandfathered as a private residence to Bill Murphy over all those years that he operated the hotel's facility. And of course, the pump house survived the fire as well. So we really only had the cottages, Bill Murphy's support facilities, and the pump house that survived. Those were the only surviving hotel-related structures. This is a wonderful photograph just showing a family having fun. It's the Grinnell family. Obviously, they were taking it to capture the people, but what they captured was one of only about 3 photograph that exists of the pump house. Of course, you know, why would anybody take a photograph of a utility building? You know, we just don't think about that going about our everyday life, but wonderful for us to have stumbled upon that photograph. And then we see the former hotel. We see the location of the pump house. I have this Sanborn map here again, just to remind me to talk about how much land was left when that hotel burned. And in 1923, soon after the fire, the new ownership, the 12 businessmen, including Fred Pantlin, that owned the hotel, they started talking about rebuilding the hotel. It was still a thriving enterprise in 1923, but we have to think back to the West Michigan Park Association that originally set those open parks of land aside for public use. And what became clear is that the hotel had never owned the land on which the hotel stood. And so they had no ownership on which to build a new hotel. There was some talk about conveying the land to them, but ultimately it was too much of a risk to invest in a hotel. By the 1920s, a new hotel would have cost millions of dollars, even back then. And so ultimately, it was a very complicated negotiation, but the ownership decided to sell the land for a very reasonable price. The West Michigan Park Association, together with the railroad, conveyed that land to the state of Michigan. And by 1925, the Ottawa Beach State Park opened as a public facility. So that is why we have our beautiful beach today. And while the hotel drew upwards of sometimes 1 million people a year in the 1920s, the beach is drawing upwards of 2 million people today. Now, as far as the other hotels, the Macatawa Hotel operated well into the 1950s. Steamers were still delivering people from Chicago into the 1940s, not as regularly as they did in the early years, but that operated for quite some time. And then we can see some of the other area hotels. Many of them burned, some of them came down. So as we move forward into the 20th century, the automobiles really changed the character of travel. Rather than coming back to the same resorts year after year, people began branching out, traveling farther and farther away. But I come back to this photograph to just relate it to modern day Ottawa Beach. Here is what the plat of land on which these structures stood. The structure right down here, I'm assuming you all see my cursors. This is this structure. This is the Blau house today that stands on the Bill Murphy former property. So you can kind of get your bearings. This is what was the Parkside Marina that Elaine Blau operated for another number of years. This is a view from Parkside Marina. You can see her house. By the mid 2000s. These structures had all been removed, and there's this is the former Pantlin, then Winery Cottage that is still standing, and you can see all the row of cottages that we still see here, all the same cottages. So again, when you're down there, I want you to picture the past when you're looking at the present. There's the arrows that show the relationship of all those. The history out there is very complicated, but over the last dozen years, the cottage owners, which still today make up the West Michigan Park Association, through many years of negotiation, they have deeded all of the Macatawa area frontage to Ottawa County. And Ottawa County developed that frontage with the same ideals in mind that the West Michigan Park Association had when they deeded those parks for public use. This is there for our use and enjoyment. So they have, the Ottawa County has developed the Black Lake Boardwalk. They developed the Mount Pisgah Boardwalk up to the top of Mount Pisgah. When you climb those stairs, when you reach the very top tier of the stairway, we know that that water tower once stood somewhere right around there. And the most recent development along Black Lake Boardwalk, this was 2 years ago, is the Park Township Plaza and the Ottawa Beach Marina. The marina is run by the Ottawa County Parks and Recreation Division, and they collaborated with Park Township to install the monument and the brick park there. My firm designed the monument, and if you get a chance to get out here and read these interpretive plaques, they give a very good overview of how Park Township went from a series of private resort parks to what we have today, a series of public parks spread throughout Park Township. So we've come full circle. This is an aerial view that shows how extraordinary Holland still is, how what began as a tourist mecca for the early passengers on the steamship and the railroad passengers remains a tourist mecca today. As June comes to a close and July is just around the corner, we know that the next 3 months are going to be very busy tourist time in Holland. Certainly a good thing after last year's very quiet tourist season, so we can all look forward to that. And I want to also point out the changes that have occurred to the pump house over the years. The how the facility looked in the early 1910s, or excuse me, how it looked in the 2010s, how it looks today. That old Deming pump that we know was moved into the electric light plant, making it a pump house, and how that same Deming pump looks today, fully interpreted inside that museum. We've glassed over the former pipe entry so that you can really get a vision of what that was like without all the dirt and soot that it must have once been. And then the north gallery of the pump house that used to house the dynamos, that is today the exhibit hall. So as you visit that museum, which is free of charge to the public, you'll now know a bit about that structure's history. So there it is in all its glory. And in 2018, the Historic Ottawa Beach Society won the State History Award from the Historical Society of Michigan for the preservation efforts that have taken place in that structure. I'll also briefly mention that the plans are underway to, this is the toilet addition, plans are underway to enclose this portion of the addition so that it can house the reception room and gift store for the museum. And that's going to allow us to further expand the space inside the museum so that we can bring you more exhibits. So if anybody is interested in potentially helping to fund that addition, the Historic Ottawa Beach Society is seeking, I believe it is about $70,000 for that, that lobby addition to allow us to expand museum offerings. And so with that, we've brought things full circle from the 1880s to the present. And we've got some time left to take questions. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and see all your beautiful faces. And hopefully there's some questions and we can talk more about this.
Valerie, thank you for that. It looks like right now I only have one question in the chat. You may have already addressed it and I may have missed it, but Peg is asking, when was the Grand Hotel built and how much did the Ottawa resemble its furnishings and
Good
service?
point. Peg, you know, I just looked that fact up for one of my other lectures. I have to remember, I think the Grand Hotel was built in 1885. So really close to the vintage of the Ottawa Beach. I imagine it was a little grander than Ottawa Beach. Those interior pictures of the Hotel Ottawa, it was certainly luxurious, but definitely more casual than the early pictures I've seen of the Grand Hotel. But the same type of patrons, people that needed to take boats to do their summer traveling.
Thank you for that.
Is there anything else?
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
A couple of things going on. I don't see, actually, something else did just come into the chat. I noticed the lighthouse was white in the 1925 photo of the beach. When
Yep.
did it become big red?
Well, that's a whole other presentation. I learned quite a bit about our beloved Big Red. I've penned the first few chapters of a book about Big Red, and Anne has done some proofing on that, and she knows that I've started the manuscript saying Big Red was not always big, it's not always red, and it wasn't even always a lighthouse. Briefly, the structure before our structure was built in 1870. I point out in my program about the lighthouse that much of the information on the historic signs on either side of the channel is wrong. We've been able to prove that information wrong doing the exhibit out there. But the structure that we know today was put up in 1907. It was built as a fog signal building. We needed that whole structure to house the equipment to make the little sound from a whistle that was about 4 feet tall. And then it was 1936 before a metal lighthouse was removed. I think it was 36. I don't have my notes in front of me. And the light was moved on top of the fog signal building. And that's what made the Holland Harbor Lighthouse as we know it today. That lighthouse was a manila yellow color for decades and decades. At some point in the 40s, just the lighthouse portion, the 30 or so feet that held the light, was painted red. But it wasn't until the 1950s when the government said, when the government said that all buildings on the right side of a channel had to be painted red. And so it was in the 50s that was first painted red. And it took until the 70s before, many of you know him, Jack Cote and Bill Wickers got together and said, how can we brand our lighthouse to help preserve it? And the two of them together coined the word Big Red as our new name for that lighthouse. So that was simply a branding. It was a really brilliant branding idea that they had so that we would sort of humanize Big Red and work to save it. And as you all know, the Holland Harbor Lighthouse Historical Association has done just that. That lighthouse did not get sold to public hands. It still stands there. And the Holland Harbor Lighthouse Association has made agreements with the homeowners in the Macatawa area to allow the public to walk through their private land to get out and see that lighthouse. If you visit the Pump House Museum, you will see a digital exhibit, and you can kind of touch your way and learn everything there is to know about our Big Red.
Thank you. I think that answered a question for a lot of people, including myself. How did that come about? So I have a comment, just thank you in all bolded letters for such a great presentation. And then Suzanne Harrington would like to know, how are the sewage services managed in the heyday of the inn? And I have a couple questions following that when you're done.
Well, you know, sewage we've studied water, we've studied electric light, we haven't studied sewage. So perhaps there's somebody out there more knowledgeable than me, but I have to tell you, I don't know anything about sewage, and I think I'm okay with that. So we're gonna have to leave it at that. Some other expert will come into play there. Anything else?
Yes. Wait, hold on one moment.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tom.
Okay, I don't know if anybody else can, but
Okay.
I was wondering about.
Yeah, my questions are, I'm sorry, Tom.
All right, go ahead.
You know what, Tom, why don't you go ahead? I'm gonna see if I can get the office quieted down for a second. You go ahead with your question.
Okay, I was a little curious about the water that was, drawn in to serve the hotels.
Yeah.
Was that spring water, or was it just taken out of the lake?
No, we do understand that it was spring water. Because even back in the, early 1900s, there was contamination in Black Lake from the industries that were near the city of Holland. So we understand it was spring-fed water. We understand that several of the cottages actually operated little windmills and had their own pumps. So it was the hotel that operated these systems. And I think when one, I'm not an expert on springs, but I think when one dried up, they would move the equipment and tap into another. So no, we weren't drinking Black Lake back then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the
Well,
next
that was my question.
question
Go ahead.
in the chat is, when were the big steamers, the US, South American, et cetera, coming into Lake Michigan? Were those passengers at the hotels too?
You're catching me a little off guard with my years, but I can tell you that on July 5th, I am going to be at the Pump House Museum talking about the era of the steamships. Yes, indeed, the South American, North American, and Alabama, all owned by the Georgian Bay shipping line. They didn't so much bring the passengers into Holland. They were operating on Lake Michigan, but they wintered in Holland. Holland was their winter quarters. And so that's why they're so beloved here. But most of those ships were running longer lines. They weren't just doing the Chicago to Holland line. So I would encourage you to come to my July 5th program. It'd be a good excuse to come see the Pump House Museum. I'm vaccinated. Hopefully all of you are vaccinated. We're going to have the doors open. We'll probably have a little bit smaller capacity in there. We'll probably limit it to about 70 people, but I'll be talking about the steamship era. So lots of fun topics.
Great, thank you. There's one more question in the chat. Is our current Ottawa Beach Road built on top of the old railroad tracks?
Yes, very, very much right on top of the railroad tracks. And built by, as I understand it, it was built by the railroad because at the time that they took away the spur line, they were still operating the hotel. So they still needed a way to get people out there. So that's one of the reasons when you drive out there, the pump house is so very close to the road. You know, I'm sure there have been accidents over the years colliding with the corner of the building, but right next to the pump, well, the electric light plant, there was a dock, and that's where the coal that fired the boiler that operated the dynamos, that's where that coal was delivered, and the coal came on the railroad. So it was very important that that railroad be near the pump house. So so there's a lot of history. Those Sanborn maps are extraordinary. I encourage all of you who own older homes in Holland to take a look at those old maps and see your homes. And I don't know if you're in Herb's house shows up on the Sanborns. I don't know when your house was built, but really, really fun to see those old structures.
Yeah, it was called the Olive House, and it was
The Olive.
1906. Yeah.
Yeah, so you'd be on the 1908 Sanborns.
Okay.
Great.
Well, thank you for answering those questions in the chat. I don't currently have anything else. Does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question? Or you can certainly put it into the chat and I'll watch.
I have a question. Are the books available at Amazon? Her books?
You know, a lot of my books are, but my Lakewood Farm and Zoo book is only available through my publisher. It's available at Reader's World, and it's available at the Pump House Museum. So we're keeping that local instead of going out there because it's got a limited run. That book was funded by Bert Getz. And so the proceeds of that book go to the Pump House Museum. So I encourage you all to pick up a book there, another excuse to go to the Pump House. And Reader's World has all the other books. We always like to use our local businesses, and Amazon, you can find some of my books.
Valerie, how long did the Sanborn maps continue?
You know, in Holland, I think the last one that I looked at was 1916, I think. I'm not an expert on that. I think I looked at later ones for Ottawa Beach after the fire, and I believe they stopped producing them for out there because there was no public structure. It was just private then. So somebody else out there is smarter than me about that, but I think they went well into the 1970s, I think.
What's the best source to locate them?
Well, you know, you can just go online, Google Sanborn Map, Holland, Michigan, and Library of Congress. It's real easy to see them online at the Library of Congress. But the Joint Archives and the Holland Museum both have files, and they can have you look at PDF versions. But honestly, a good Google will get you almost right to any Sanborn map, any city, anywhere in the country, because Library of Congress has them all online.
Thank you.
Well, we're close to our 2:30 time. Does anybody have anything else that they'd like to add? Otherwise,
I just want to say that was a wonderful presentation. This is Ellie Vance, and it was just wonderful. And I'm looking forward a little later, probably a little later this year. Valerie, I think you're going to be speaking with the Women's Literary Club about the farm.
I am.
Zoo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
So that'll be great. We'll
Looking forward to
publish
that. Yeah,
that. Yeah,
good,
Cool.
good.
thank you.
Okay, yeah, we, Van Rieken wrote a book, The Farm That Was a Zoo. I think he wrote that in the early 80s. That has been our go-to resource for the, information about George Getz's Lakewood Farm and Zoo. But long story, I'll tell in my presentation. I had the opportunity to both design the exhibit and write the National Register application requested by the current homeowners, Patty and Ken Bing. So in the process of writing the National Register nomination, I learned things we never knew about Lakewood Farm and Zoo, including the fact that George Getz didn't build it. And you know who did build it? A single woman in
Yes.
1902. Yay, women
Yes.
power. So we have lots to learn about the Lakewood Farm and Zoo, and Bert Getz shared with us almost 800 photographs
Oh my
that
gosh.
had never been seen before. So the book has over 100 images in it.
Wow, wonderful.
Yeah, can't wait to talk about that.
Can't wait to hear it.
Well, I have several comments in the chat of just thank you so much. Michael White's fabulous presentation, and it is a fabulous subject matter, something that we all are familiar with our surroundings, and it's just very interesting to hear the history and the stories that go much deeper into what is right in our own backyard.
Yep.
So on behalf of HASP and Tom as the coordinator, we just thank you so much for your time and a wonderful presentation. And with that, if everybody, oh, I see some thumbs up.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It was fun. Great seeing all your faces.
Everybody have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you hopefully tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm going to go ahead and end the class. Let me stop recording.